There were signs. I just didn't want to see them. My daughter-in-law had been unusually warm that week, calling me every morning, asking how I was sleeping, whether my knee was giving me trouble again, whether I was eating enough. She even brought over a pot of her chicken soup on Tuesday, the kind with the wide egg noodles I've always liked. My son stood behind her in my kitchen doorway smiling, and I thought to myself, maybe things are finally settling down between us. I'm 67 years old. I retired 3 years ago after 31 years with the County Water Authority. My wife Lorraine passed away 14 months before all of this happened. Pancreatic cancer. 4 months from diagnosis to the end. We've been married 42 years, and I still reach for her coffee mug every morning before I catch myself. The house feels different without her. Bigger, somehow, even though it's the same 1,200 square feet we raised our son in. My son's name is Mitchell. He's 38, married to a woman named Adrian for 6 years. They have 2 kids, a boy, 7, and a girl, 4. And they live about 20 minutes from me in a subdivision that always smells like fresh mulch and lawn chemicals. Mitchell works in commercial insurance. Adrian manages a dental practice. On paper, they're doing fine. But money does something to people. I've watched it my whole life. It doesn't change who they are. It just turns up the volume on who they already were. The Thursday morning Adrian called. She says she'd made an appointment for me at a men's wellness clinic across town. She said Mitchell had been worried about my blood pressure. She said she'd read about this place, Dr. Storster. Harmon's clinic, very reputable. They do a full cardiovascular workup, and she'd taken the liberty of scheduling me for a full evaluation. Free of charge, she said. A gift. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. But I was flattered, if I'm honest. My daughter-in-law, who had never once remembered my birthday without Mitchell prompting her, had gone out of her way to book me a medical appointment. It felt like progress. It felt like maybe losing Lorraine had reminded all of us what matters. I drove myself there on a Friday morning. The clinic was in a professional complex off Route 9, tucked between an orthodontist and a tax preparation office. Clean lobby, leather chairs, a water dispenser with cucumber slices in it. The kind of place that works hard to feel expensive. Adrian was already there when I arrived, which surprised me. She said she'd wanted to make sure I found it okay. She hugged me, which she almost never does, and walked me up to the front desk herself. The receptionist was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. She smiled at me and started typing, and Adrian stepped away, said she was going to find the restroom. I stood there watching the receptionist pull up my appointment, and then she paused. Just a small hesitation, the kind you almost miss. She looked at the screen, then at me, and then over her shoulder. She leaned forward across the desk. "Mr. Aldridge," she said quietly. "Before you go in, I need to tell you something." She glanced toward the hallway where Adrian had disappeared. This clinic has a financial services division. They sometimes bring in patients for wellness evaluations that transition into estate planning consultations. I've seen it before. She kept her voice low, steady. "Don't sign anything today. Whatever they put in front of you, ask to take it home first." I stared at her. She straightened up immediately and went back to typing, professional as ever, as if she'd said nothing at all. By the time Adrian came back, I had already decided I would play along and watch. The first 40 minutes were legitimate. A nurse took my blood pressure, which was fine, 122/78, thank you very much, and a technician ran an EKG. I sat in a paper gown in a room that smelled like antiseptic and tried to keep my breathing even. Then, a man came in wearing a blazer instead of a white coat. He introduced himself as a health and financial wellness coordinator. He said the clinic had a holistic model. He said that cardiovascular stress and financial stress were deeply linked, which actually I'd believe, and that they offered complimentary consultations to help seniors simplify their estate planning and protect their assets. He had a folder. Inside the folder were documents I'd need a real attorney to fully understand. But I'm not a stupid man. I could read enough to see that one of them was a durable power of attorney form. Another appeared to be a property transfer document. There was a line on the second page that listed a property address. My address. My house. Lorraine and I bought that house in 1989 for $94,000. My son grew up in that house. I mowed that lawn for 34 years. Lorraine planted roses along the back fence that still bloom every June, even though she's been gone for more than a year. That house is worth somewhere around $300,000 now in this market. And someone had already filled in the address on a transfer document before I'd been asked a single question about my wishes. I said I needed to use the restroom. The coordinator smiled and said to take my time. I got dressed, walked back through the lobby, nodded to the receptionist, who looked at me carefully and gave the smallest nod back, and I walked out the front door. I sat in my truck for a few minutes in the parking lot. My hands were on the steering wheel. I wasn't shaking, exactly. I was something else. That particular kind of calm that comes when the thing you didn't want to believe turns out to be true. I drove home. Here's what I want you to understand about my son. Mitchell is not a bad person. He's a weak one. There's a difference, and the difference matters, even when the result looks the same from the outside. He was always the kid who went along. In school, in friendships, in his marriage. Adrian is the one who drives that household, and everyone who spent more than an hour with them knows it. She's smart, and she's organized, and she's relentless. And Mitchell mostly nods and says, "Sounds good, babe." Lorraine used to worry about it. She'd say, "I just hope he remembers he has a spine somewhere under all that agreeableness." I told her she was being hard on him. I think about that now. I didn't call Mitchell when I got home. I needed to think first. I went upstairs to the bedroom closet. On the top shelf, behind the winter sweaters, Lorraine kept a fireproof lockbox. She was meticulous about paperwork, insurance policies, the deed to the house, our wills, investment statements. I had barely opened it since she passed. Every time I tried, the handwriting on the folders felt like too much. I pulled out the folder labeled House/Deed. Everything was there, as it should be. The original deed from 1989. The refinance documents from 2003. The updated deed from 2011 when we added both our names after an estate attorney advised us to. All clean, all in order. But as I was putting the folder back, I noticed another one. Thinner. Labeled in Lorraine's handwriting, Mitchell. Keep. I hadn't seen that one before. Inside were 3 things. A letter Lorraine had written, dated about 8 months before she was diagnosed. A printout of an email chain, and a document that appeared to be a loan agreement. I sat on the edge of the bed and read the letter first. Lorraine wrote that she'd lent Mitchell $47,000 in the spring of that year. That he had come to her privately, without telling me, saying he and Adrian were behind on their mortgage, and that Adrian had some business debts she was managing. Lorraine wrote that she'd given him the money from her personal savings account, the one she'd been adding to quietly for years from her part-time bookkeeping work. She wrote that she'd made him sign a promissory note. She wrote that she hadn't told me because she was afraid it would cause a rift, and she was hoping Mitchell would repay the money before I ever knew. She wrote, "I believe he will do the right thing. But if you're reading this and he hasn't, then I suppose you need to know. She'd known something might go wrong. She'd prepared for it quietly, the way she did everything." I sat there for a long time. Then I read the email chain. It was between Adrian and someone identified only by first name, someone named Sandra, discussing the clinic on Route 9. Adrian had forwarded an inquiry form. Sandra had replied with a standard pitch language about their senior asset transition program. Adrian had written back, "His wife just passed. He owns the house outright. I've been building trust with him for the past 2 months. I think he's ready. I've been building trust with him." The chicken soup made sense now. The morning phone calls. The birthday card she'd sent last month with the handwritten note inside. All of it had been a timeline. A strategy. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. Not because I think there's anything wrong with crying, but because what I felt wasn't grief. I was past grief. What I felt was the particular cold clarity of a man who understands exactly what's been done to him. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, sat at the kitchen table, and made a list. The first call I made was to my attorney. Not a will and trust guy. My attorney, Owen Beckett, who I've known since we coached Little League together in the late 90s. He's been practicing law in this county for 35 years, and he has a way of listening that makes you feel like you're the only case he has. I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Okay, don't talk to Mitchell or Adrian until we figure out what we're looking at." The second call I made was to the County Adult Protective Services office. I'd never called a number like that in my life. It was strange to dial it, strange to explain my situation to a woman who was kind and professional and clearly had heard variations of the story before. She said they'd open a report and that someone would follow up within 48 hours. Owen called me back the next morning. He'd done some digging. The clinic on Route 9 had been flagged in 2 previous complaints to the State Attorney General's office, both involving elderly patients who had signed over property rights during what they believed were medical consultations. One case had been settled quietly. One was still pending. The financial wellness coordinator was not a licensed financial advisor. The power of attorney form they tried to have me sign was not properly witnessed, which would have made it invalid, but invalid documents can still do damage if banks or title companies don't look carefully. He said, "You did exactly the right thing by walking out." I asked him about Adrian. He was quiet again. Then he said, "Potentially yes, but the email you found, that's significant. Don't share that with anyone except law enforcement." I had to see Mitchell. I drove over on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced. Adrian's car was gone. She'd taken the kids to her sister's house for the weekend. I found out later. Mitchell answered the door in sweatpants and a sweatshirt, holding a mug of coffee, and his face did something complicated when he saw me standing there. "Dad," he said. "Let me come in," I said. We sat in his living room. The kids' toys were everywhere. There was a drawing on the refrigerator visible through the kitchen doorway. My granddaughter had written "Grandpa" in purple crayon at the top of it. I'd seen it there for weeks. I kept looking at it while we talked. I told him what had happened at the clinic. I watched his face. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who'd been waiting to be caught. He said, "I didn't know they were going to put the house papers in front of you." I said, "But you knew about the clinic." He looked at his coffee mug. "She said it was just a checkup," he said. "She said it was a real doctor's appointment." I asked him if he believed that. He didn't answer. I reached into the folder I'd brought and put Lorraine's letter on the coffee table between us. He looked at it and his jaw tightened. He recognized the handwriting. "She told me she wasn't going to tell you," he said. "She didn't," I said. "She prepared for the possibility that she might need to." That landed on him. I could see it land. He set down his mug and put his hands over his face. Here is the thing about watching your child cry when they're 38 years old. It doesn't look the way it did when they were 4. When Mitchell was small and he hurt himself or something scared him, his whole face would crumple, and he'd reach for me. And the reaching was the thing. That pure, uncomplicated need. Now he was sitting on his own couch in his own house, and he cried like a man trying to keep the sound inside, and he didn't reach for anything. I didn't go to him. I stayed where I was. When he could talk again, he told me that the business debt was real. Adrian's investment in a franchise opportunity had collapsed 3 years ago, and they'd been quietly hemorrhaging money since. The loan from Lorraine had bought them time, but not enough. Adrian had found out about the clinic through a woman in her professional network. She had framed it to Mitchell as a solution, not a theft. She'd told him they'd use a small portion of the house's equity and repay it, that I'd never even know, that it was just borrowing against the future inheritance anyway. He said he knew it was wrong, and he went along with it, and he was sorry. I told him being sorry was a start. Then I told him about the email, the one where his wife had written about building trust with me. I read it to him out loud. His face went through several different expressions, none of them easy to look at. I asked him if he knew Adrian had been cultivating this for months. He said he didn't know it had been that calculated. I asked him if he believed her when she said the clinic was just a checkup. He was quiet for a long time. And then he said, "No, I think I didn't ask because I didn't want to know." That was the most honest thing he'd said to me in a long time. Owen filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general on my behalf. The Adult Protective Services report added documentation. Within 6 weeks, the clinic on Route 9 had been served with a civil investigative demand. I later learned that my case, combined with the 2 prior complaints, was enough to trigger a formal investigation. The man in the blazer, the wellness coordinator, turned out to have 2 prior fraud-related civil judgments in another state. The clinic's license was suspended pending investigation. I don't know yet what will happen to Adrian specifically. Owen has advised me to let the process work. What I know is that the investigator assigned to my case spoke with her, and she retained a private attorney within 24 hours of that conversation, which I was told is not the behavior of someone who believes they've done nothing wrong. The promissory note Lorraine made Mitchell sign was still valid. Owen helped me formalize a repayment arrangement, structured with interest over 5 years. Mitchell agreed without argument. I think part of him was relieved to finally have it out in the open after all those months of carrying it. People ask me. Well, one person has asked me, my neighbor Gus, who heard enough through the fence that I ended up telling him the whole story. They ask me if I'm angry. The honest answer is yes. But it's not a simple anger. It has layers, the way grief has layers, and I've come to think the 2 aren't as different as people say. I'm angry at Adrian. I think I'll be angry at Adrian for a long time, not because she targeted my house. Property can be protected, and mine was, but because she weaponized the months after Lorraine died. She looked at my loss and saw an opening. She made me feel like things were getting better between us when she was running a clock. That's the part that sits in me hardest. I'm angry at Mitchell too, but it's different. He's my son, and I understand him, which almost makes it worse. I know exactly how he ended up in that living room going along with something he knew was wrong. I watched him learn to do that his whole life. Some of it is on me. That's not easy to sit with. What I'm not, though, and I want to be clear about this because I think it matters. I'm not helpless. I'm not confused. I'm not a man who is going to sign whatever someone put in front of him because he's 67 and he lives alone, and sometimes the days are quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum. I raised a family in this house and buried my wife from it, and I'm still paying attention. The week before this all happened, I rewired an outdoor outlet, replaced a faulty breaker, and read 2/3 of a James Lee Burke novel. I'm fine. The receptionist at that clinic, her name, I later found out, is Judith. She'd been working the front desk there for almost a year, and in that time, she'd watched other patients be walked through that same process. She'd reported it to her supervisor and been told to mind her own business. She told investigators she decided the next time someone came in who didn't know what was happening, she was going to say something and let the chips fall. She's since left that job. I hope she finds a better one. It's been 8 months now. Mitchell and I have dinner most Sundays. His kids come with him. Adrian usually doesn't. That arrangement has become, without anyone formally naming it, the way things are for now. My granddaughter has started asking me to teach her how to play cards, and we sit at the kitchen table and I deal out crazy eights, and she cheats in ways I pretend not to notice. The roses along the back fence bloomed again in June. They were better this year than last. Fuller, more of them. I don't know enough about gardening to say why. Lorraine would have known. She would have had an explanation about the soil or the rainfall or the way the season had gone, and she would have told me in that patient way she had, the way she explained everything she understood, like she genuinely wanted to share what she knew. I talk to her sometimes out there, not in the way some people talk to the dead, not expecting an answer, not pretending. More like reporting in, letting her know what's happened, letting her know that her paperwork came through, that the folder she labeled and left on the shelf did exactly what she must have hoped it would. I tell her the house is still ours. She planned for everything, my wife. Even the things she hoped would never happen. I still water her roses every week. I don't always do it right, but they bloom anyway. And I've decided that's enough.